Thanks again for joining us at the 2021 Sloan Sports Analytics Conference Competitive Advantage Talks presented by Kager, also known as the Craft Analytics Group. My name is Kurt Bullard, and I am a first-year MBA student at MIT Sloan. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce our next presentation, The First Four Shots. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Craig O'Shaughnessy, founder of Brain Game Tennis.
Thanks, Kurt. My specialty is tennis, and the first four shots is going to be my presentation. Let's get started. The first thing to kind of put down on the table is, when did official tennis statistics begin? And it's really not that long ago. I know as you look at a lot of the other presentations, you're going to be seeing analytics going back, many years, maybe 100 years. But tennis is very new to the game with official analytics. So in 1991, the very first official analytics were recorded in our sport. So for the last 30 years, we've been improving, it's getting better, but we're still pretty new to the game. So pre-1991, obviously a lot of tennis being played. If we go to the practice court without match analytics, it's all about guesswork, it's all about opinion, and it's certainly all about the eye test. We look at our sport, we kind of guess about what we need to work on to win matches. And, the surfaces are different all around the world. So there was a lot of opinion on what we should be working on. Our practice court globally has historically been in a 1 hour lesson. It's 50 minutes of forehands and backhands. It's repetition. It's cross court. It's ball after ball after ball. You may have been one of the people that are taking these tennis lessons. And then at the end, we throw in some serves, we throw in some net play, maybe a couple of returns, but the forehand and backhand ground strokes have dominated our practice court. It's all about consistency, repetition, shot tolerance, patience, grinding, and even suffering. In the Spanish system, there's a lot of discussion about, outlasting an opponent and being tougher than the opponent. And, without match analytics, it's, is that really the best way to go about selling the sport? Traditional player development, we go to the practice court, we kind of guess on what we need to do. Then we go to the match court and we hope. We hope the areas that we've worked on the practice court are going to lead us to a W. In 2021, we can do better. We can now look at the match court and say, okay, these are the things that matter most to winning. We can cut those elements of the match court up into derivatives of the match, then go to the practice court and practice those shot sequences very specifically. So it's kind of flipping the order. We can now go to the match court because we have those analytics and help reorganize our practice court. What's the mode in tennis? What is the most common rally length in tennis? And this is a question that until just the last couple of years, we really haven't contemplated in our sport. So we have short rallies, we have long rallies. The long rallies are the memorable ones. They're the ones that you're seeing even at the moment. A 44-shot rally is going to make its way, to a Twitter highlight reel pretty quickly. But when you look at it, what's happening the most? And that's a very important question, because it's going to shape our practice court and certainly shape how we think about our sport. It's important to understand that it's all about the ball landing in the court. So when I first looked at this, I thought it was shots hit. So if I served you, you returned to me, and I hit the next ball in, that rally length is 3 because 3 balls landed in the court. On the very next point, if I served you, you returned to me and I hit it out, that's only 2 balls landed in the court. So that's a rally length of 2. The 2015 Australian Open was where I first started examining this data. So just in very recent times. The most common rally length in tennis is a rally length of just 1 shot. The serve went in. There's a portion of that total that's going to be aces, but the vast majority of those points are going to end in a return error. When we look at rally length, and this is from the 2015 Australian Open, we see a rally length of 1 is right around 30% of our sport. Then 3 actually jumps 2, and that's what we're learning here is the halo effect of the serve, and we see 5 jumping 4. So we're also answering the question of how long does the effect of the serve last in the point before we're basically at a 50-50 battleground. and essentially the server gets 2 more shots. So the 3 and the 5, the server's leaning on the ball, and then it becomes a dead even contest. When I ask people all over the world, at the 2016 Australian Open Coaches Conference was where I first presented this data, and I've got 300 coaches in front of me in the stands. I asked them this question. The most common answer is a rally length of 4. And these coaches have, we've got millions of hours invested in this. I worked for 3 years with Novak Djokovic, 2017 through 2019. And when we first got together, I said, Novak, what is the #1 rally length that you play? And, he's all excited about this. It's a question he's never contemplated before, and he answers 4. Recently, I was on a Zoom call with Andy Murray, a former #1 in the world player, and he answers 4. Also discussing this with Madison Keys, a top 10 player on the women's tour, and she answers 4. I discussed this with Nick Bollettieri, one of the greatest coaches in our sport, and he answers 4. And it's fascinating that the longer the rally goes, the more memorable it is, and the more likely it is to stick in our long-term memory. The short rallies, the 1-shot rallies, the 3-shot rallies are almost dismissed. They come into our memory, they go into our short-term memory, they're almost seen as a failure, and they leave our mind very, very quickly. So, I said to Andy on our call, I said, Andy, you've played a lot of tennis, you've reached the pinnacle, you've got a couple of Wimbledon titles, you've been #1 in the world. And I said, in a very matter-of-fact way, I said, Andy, how can you possibly be so wrong? And basically everybody in our sport, not just you, but how can we be so wrong about this number that you've played, millions of hours of tennis, whether it's in juniors or on the professional tour, you've watched so many hours just thinking about our sport. How can you possibly think something that happens 7.5% of the time happens more than something that happens basically 30% of the time? And again, this shapes how you think. It shapes how, your game style is. And, Andy's answer was, he basically is very dismissive of those short rallies in his mind. And, they haven't reached the promised land of that longer rally. So if we look over here on page 2, this is rally length of 1 through 9. Page 2 is 10 through 19. Traditionally, this is where we spend all our time on the practice court, but we see in the match, it doesn't happen very much at all. So page 1, rally length of 0 through 9 is basically 90% of our sport. Page 2 is, around, as we see here, around 11%. So, on page 2 is where we begin. If you're a beginner in tennis, you're starting out, you need to hit the ball in the court. So you are going to be introduced into our sport on page 2. But when you start competing, when winning and losing matters, you need to be moving your training over to page 1. You need to be doing more work on the serve, the return, and the 2 shots that follow that. So, it's very enlightening to see what the match data is in conflict with how we thought our sport was organized. This is just a simple graph on how, if we go over to the first column, the blue column, that's a 1-shot rally. The green column is 2, then it's 3 and 4. It's how our sport is organized. And, on the practice court, it's like a radio wave. It's oscillating the same into eternity. It's ball after ball after ball. And, when you're refining a stroke, that's essentially what we want. But when we go to a match, it looks very, very different. This is like a shock wave. It's like an earthquake where all of the action happens at the start of the point and then it very quickly dissipates. And this is the conflict that we have, pre-data. We go to the practice court and we practice all the long rallies. It's forehands and backhands, and it's in a rally position where, I'm a meter or 2 behind the baseline, and my partner on the other side of the net's putting the ball exactly where I want it, and I get a lot of rhythm. Whereas the match court, there's not a lot of rhythm at all. There's a lot of serving and returning, a lot of errors associated with that. So because our match data, is much more prolific now. Again, before 1991, we have nothing. 1991 to about 2015, better. The last few years, it's really improving. So we're going to, change this picture and say, yes, in that red area, we're certainly still going to have some element of the practice court, but we cannot have 50 minutes in that red area and 10 minutes in that green area, because it's simply not how our match is organized. Consistency. Is consistency overrated? Well, when I first thought about this, it's like, how, this is a bedrock, a pillar of our sport. How in the world can consistency be overrated? And what we're looking at here is, once again, when we're starting out in our sport, putting the ball in the court 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times, super important. We need to put the ball in the court in order to play our sport. But when we go to the match court, are those longer rallies really the difference between winning and losing matches? So this is a official stats sheet from the Australian Open. We see at the top, Margaret Court Arena. This is a Russian player, Kuznetsov, against Monfils from France. We see the score at the bottom. And this is this picture is actually from 2016. It's just a little clearer. But the first time I saw this exact picture was in 2015 at the Australian Open, a year earlier. And I was scrolling down, and for the very first time in my tennis life, I saw this data. And it says rallies of 0 through 4, rallies of 5 through 8, rallies of 9+. So if we go to Monfils on the far right side, when we look at those numbers, so Monfils is the first column. So in 0 through 4, he won 95 and lost 67. In 5 through 8, he won 30 and lost 28, so much closer. And even though he won the match in rallies of 9+, he only won 7 points and lost 18. So essentially, if you group together 5 through 8 and 9+, he had a losing record there, but he had a winning record in 0 through 4. So once again, one of the first things I'm like, how can you have a rally of 0? So I went and asked the stats company, and they said, well, again, we are looking at the ball landing in the court, which is a rally of 0 is a double fault. I gave them a nickname to try and understand them a little bit better. So 0 through 4 is first strike, 5 through 8 are patterns of play, and 9+ are your extended rallies. So that kind of gives us a framework to look at. Within the first 4 shots, yes, we're looking at the serve, the return, the serve +1, which is the first shot after the serve, and the return +1, the first shot, the first ground stroke forehand or backhand after the return. They weren't collated into a tournament totals page, so I went through each match, put it into a spreadsheet, and came up with the answer. And again, before 2015, we had no idea. No one in our sport had seen these numbers. So for the men, it was 70% of all points were in the 0 through 4 rally length, 20% in 5 through 8, and only 10% in 9+. So as I'm looking at this, I'm like, trying to make sense of this data for the first time. It's kind of like 7 points out of 10. The most consistent players in the world, 7 points out of 10, they're only putting the ball in the court, and touching the ball a maximum of 2 times. So there were many more short rallies than I thought. And, again, I compared this to the practice court. The long rallies are essentially 90% of our practice court, but they only correspond and wash over to about 10% of our match court. So I'm like, our practice court is broken. It is not reflective of what's happening in the match at all. Then I went through and looked at match winner versus match loser, and did the match winner also correspondingly win the 0 through 4 and or the 5 through 8 and or the 9+. We saw with the Monfils match, he won the match. He won 0 through 4. He barely won 5 through 8, but he lost the battle of 9+. So I wanted to know which of these 3, and quite possibly are all 3 going to be equal with the match winner winning the match and also winning this rally length. So I went through 5 Grand Slams of data. There's 2 US Opens here, and these are the results. The match winner in 5 Grand Slams on the men's side correspondingly won the 0 through 4 battle 91% of the time. So it's almost a lock. When I go through, there's something kind of weird or unusual has got to happen in order for you to win the match and not also be triumphant in the 0 through 4 rally length. In 5 through 8, it drops down dramatically. It's only 66% of the time, 2/3, that the match winner is also winning that rally length. And in 9+, remember, we're starting at a 50-50 battle. At 9+, the match winner is only winning 55% of the 9+ rally length. So this is an analysis of winning in our sport. quite often, we cut it up with how many forehand winners or how many aces or how many times at net. This is just a global view of winning. So if you want to say, okay, I need my players to win more, you are certainly going to gravitate to doing more work in the 0-4 rally length. The data is very, very clear here. On the hard court side, only at the US Open with the men, 86% of the time, the match winners winning 0-4, 61% in 5-8, and it's a coin flip. The players are walking off, and you ask a player, "Did you win your match?" And they say no. So, "Did you win the long rallies?" They said yes, absolutely. So we're seeing here, in one way we can say match losers are actually quite consistent. They do well in the long rallies. They do not do well in the 0-4 rally length. For the ladies in 2015 at the US Open in 9+, they had a losing record. They're only winning 43% of the rallies. Each rally length has a different landscape in our mind. So, and when we go to the practice court, 9+, it's kind of like being in Tuscany. We're comfortable. The weather's good. I'm rallying cross court. I'm getting lots of touches of the ball on my strings. Everybody's happy, rallying cross court in the practice court. 5-8 is about patterns of play. It's your tennis IQ. It's almost like playing chess. Rafael Nadal is the best player in the world in 0-4, 5-8, and 9+. He has the highest win percentage in 5-8. And in 0-4, we've already seen it's the least practiced. This is 90% in 9+, and only 10% in 0-4. And it's like being in Switzerland. There's more errors there. It's less comfortable. There's less rhythm. And, we shy away from this on the practice court, but we see in a match, every point starts in Switzerland. And players will say, "Why can't I win more matches? I'm so good in Tuscany." It's because you haven't spent the time in Switzerland, and you can't get to Tuscany because you're making too many errors at the start of the point. Under 12 tennis, does 0-4 rally length dominate in junior tennis? The answer is yes. At every single level of our sport, the number one rally length is always going to be in that 0-4 range. We see juniors in the 55 to 57% range. When we're only examining 0-4, the serve, return, serve +1, it's tough for these kids. So we see return errors are number one of points that only happen in 0-4. Then it's serve +1 errors, the first shot after the serve, return +1, and double faults. So, we see kids out there on the court having a meltdown and getting upset and leaving our sport. They are going to play more 0-4 points than anything else. And the thing that happens in 0-4 is a return error, a serve +1 error, a return +1, and a serve error. It's tough, it's difficult, and we're making lots of errors. And if we don't explain this dynamic to our kids, we're seeing the results of that. We see tears on the court out there. All points versus 0-4. Tennis in general is about 70% errors. 0-4, it's about 80% errors. We see how difficult it is. We're going to finish up with an examination of clay court tennis. Again, we talked about these are the hallmarks of clay court tennis, particularly the repetition and shot tolerance. Are points actually longer on clay? I did an examination of Roland Garros versus the US Open. I wanted to know this for sure. Everybody in our sport has said it. It was never questioned. Roland Garros versus the US Open, 2016, 2017, 2018. It's simply not true. We see there are more short points, and it's very close, but it's more short points in 0-4 at Roland Garros and more of the longer points in 9+ at the US Open. When we look at the women, it's exactly the same with the 0-4, slightly more 0-4 at Roland Garros. They are dead even with the short and long points. So, just giving, the idea that yes, points are longer on clay, not challenging that. We need to challenge every analytic that we have in our sport. 2017 Roland Garros, I looked at 17 tournament statistics to see what mattered most to winning on clay: serving, returning, rallying, approaching, rally length, and the final shot of the rally. They were all examined. Again, we start with a 50-50 battle, and let's start with the ones that didn't matter the most. So 17th on the list, average first serve speed. Moved a 50-50 battle barely. So 17 through 11, these didn't matter a lot to the final outcome. We see 9+ shots coming in at 10th best, not so good. And the number one thing that mattered most to winning on clay is winning the 0-4 rally length. So we put such a high, regard for rallying and consistency where, it's the first 2 touches and daylight. For the ladies, we just have the first page here. We see 0 through 4 is elevated to number 1 there as well. 9+ rallies came in 10th out of 17th position for the men and 14th out of 17th position for the ladies. So, it's 0 through 4 is the most important rally length in junior tennis, on clay, on hard, for men and for women. I'd like to thank you very much for looking at tennis in this whole presentation. I'm greatly looking forward to looking at the other presentations and learning more and seeing the crossover with all the sports and the analytics. So once again, thank you, and hopefully you've learned something from today that will help you with your own game as well. Cheers.